I'm back in Oakland and listening to the audio recordings that I tend to make in the mornings when I'm traveling on my coffee trips. I kind of wake up the hotel, make a cup of coffee, and think about what my work is and what I'm going to be focusing on. And sometimes I think, well, maybe I'll make that into a podcast. And what I don't mention, this is the start of my trip, and I had come into Nairobi the night before and really jet lagged and tired. My friend had booked me at a golf course, and I think I was a little embarrassed about staying at the lodge of a golf club. I go to check out in the morning, and soon after I start getting these alerts on my phone that I have a problem with my credit card balance. They had accidentally charged me $19,200 for a hotel room for one night. So it became my joke on the rest of the trip because I travel so cheaply that, I'd stayed at a golf course in a $19,000 hotel room. But anyway, this is day one, jet lag, talking about my trip to Kenya. I'll be in Kenya for about 6 days and then headed to Ethiopia. I'm jet lagged. It's hard to stay asleep for a full night, so I made it till 5:30 a.m. But it's great to see the sunrise here, just outside of Nairobi. Definitely not in the coffee producing areas. And this whole trip is more of a cupping trip, tasting, approving, following up on an earlier trip I made, at least to Ethiopia, in December. So I'm back just a couple months later. And that's kind of how it goes in some places, because the best time to come and communicate with the people you're buying coffee from, look at the samples, is not exactly the same time as when the harvest is in full bore and you can see the production, get a really good understanding of what's going on and what to expect, kind of make a plan. That type of trip is a terrible time to cup usually, because the coffees, if there are any, will taste really fresh and green, and it's really hard to judge super fresh coffee, for me at least. Maybe some people really have the talent, especially people that are just doing it all the time. But coffee, when it's super fresh and not very rested, as we call it, tends to have good acidity, but there's literally flavors of greenness like chlorophyll, vegetable, various kinds, sort of cilantro. Not all bad. And for me, there's a lack of developed sweetness in a lot of those coffees. They're hard to read in that way. And I'm not really sure if that's just because there's other things going on that kind of block the sense of sweetness in a coffee. But a lot of people may not know that coffee is not a fresh produce product. It needs to be cured, essentially. That's what they called it in old, especially British, or I have some manuscripts from India, and they call it curing coffee. So that's the stages after harvesting, pulping if it's washed coffee, taking the skin off, or laying it out on the raised beds. And then after it's dried down to, let's say 10.5 to 11% moisture, you're going to bulk it up and warehouse it. And that resting, which they call reposo in Spanish-speaking countries, is really important to equalize moisture and to have stability in the moisture in the coffee. That's something that also well-rested coffee, in my experience, tends to last longer once it's arrived in the U.S. and at our place and has sat for months. A really good rested coffee that went through a good process of resting will maintain a cup quality for longer. And the science behind that, I would love to get into that. We do dabble in it in that we always measure moisture content and water activity in coffee at all stages. Water activity in particular was a kind of new development that came along in my awareness of coffee about 10 years ago. And it's about I'm about to explain water activity, and I slept 5 hours and I'm jet lagged. So I'm going to take a pass there. Maybe I'll edit in a good explanation of it, but I don't think I need to do that right at this moment. Getting back to where I am and what I'm doing here, the purpose of this trip is really to kind of make approvals on coffee. Some of them we've approved by the samples being sent to us in Oakland and cupping, and now we'll be approving the pre-ship samples, I hope. And in the case of Kenya, we've kind of deferred all of our approvals. I cupped a couple big sets of samples from some of the exporters of coffees that we've bought before, but we like to put it off and wait with Kenyas. We feel like you really have to look at a broad set through the harvest to try to pick what you think is going to be the nicest coffees. And, sometimes those come a little bit later on. This harvest, there was actually some really nice early samples, but we don't want to make selections over a very long period of time for several reasons. One of them, to be honest, is that if you choose coffees piecemeal, you don't really get to line them all up in front of you and choose them in a cohesive way. In another sense, you'll have coffees of many ages, and when coffee's ready to sell here in the Kenya system, it's all been hulled and is in green bean. And green bean, even if it's in protective bags in a warehouse, will tend to drop off in quality. So it's better to hold coffee in parchment until it's ready to export, and then you mill right before you export. You want to think about that with Kenyas as a green coffee buyer. So at this part in the recording, I'm in my 4th day of nonstop cupping all day long, and I'm getting a bit tired. But I'm staying at a farmhouse in the middle of a coffee farm that my friend has. And it's beautiful. I'm walking around in the morning in the yard with my coffee. And I was thinking about the different grades of coffee I've been cupping, including the commercial grades, and how actually important the commercial grades and the price the farm gets for them is significant for their total financial picture, not just the top AA grades and stuff that we buy. And I'm also just thinking about the landscape. This area used to be heavily forested. It was cleared by the colonials for coffee farming and this kind of monoculture. So that leads me to some thoughts that I'm having this morning, day 4. This is the 4th day of my trip in Kenya, which is focused exclusively on coffee tasting, on cupping. Yesterday was particularly intense because the exporter office I went to, which is where they set up all the coffees to cup, was looking at coffees for the next auction week. Kenya has a weekly auction that I think goes for about 48 weeks. But the real interesting part starts around week 5, week 10, up to week 25, perhaps, when the main crop from the central Kenya, actually here they are counties, when those start to come in. This is the time right now. This is week 19, the next auction, and I also cupped and bid in week 18 auction. The samples all need to be cupped and then recupped by Tuesday, and then Wednesday is the auction day where they go in for There's actually a auction hall. People physically go in, but now it's not open outcry, it's electronic. And it's interesting to see. I'm not sure how it's changed because I visited there about, 10 years ago and saw it. And I think it had just made a transformation from open out call, auction where people would be like crying out their bids and old style to something they were sitting at stations and it was just going bleep, bleep. You could look up at the board and see like these old school like red LED letters, numbers, what the lot was and what it was going for. From what I understand from my friend that was a bidder, their job to bid in the auction, she told me that the Kenya auction is actually very slow. And there's a way that if you miss something, you can kind of go back to it. I'm not sure how, but Tanzania auction's incredibly fast, and the volumes of coffee are really high. You're bidding on huge amounts of coffee, and I don't know. From my experience, the Kenya auction seemed plenty fast. It was kind of scary. So an auction has the different mills and millers who are also serve as marketing agents for the farms and co-ops that they are tendering in the auction. They have what's called a catalog each week. So like tropical farm management will have the tropical catalog, and Kawabora, which is Kenya Coffee, will have their catalog. So going in yesterday to cupping, there would be a whole table that would just be Kawabora coffees, and those would be coffees that are brought from co-ops to their mill. They would mill them to green bean, and in that case they send them to a huge warehouse called Bolore, and they wait there until they are sold, then final preparation for export. So Kenya's a little weird because the coffees that are sold are all green bean. They are already milled so that they know exactly how much of the different grades there are. The grades are AA, AB, PB, P-berry, C grade, and then after that it goes into a whole bunch of grades like TT, E grade, ears, UG, usual good quality, I think, UG1, UG2. I don't really know the rest, but it's pretty fascinating. And yesterday cupping, if I wanted to, on the tables, I could cup all of those grades. Everything gets put out there. So that's another interesting thing if somebody's just a specialty buyer and has been shown samples, spot samples. Those would be samples like a specialty importer would have in the U.S., and they would offer on the spot, meaning they own them and they're in their warehouse and then they sell them. They're not forward coffees, which would be coffees you would select before they arrive in the United States or even from where they're produced. So what was I saying? I just lost myself. It's complicated here. Yeah, okay, so a specialty buyer would be used to just seeing, AA, AB, P-berry, these top grades. And you wouldn't be exposed to this fact that every coffee that comes in parchment produces all of the grades generally. When you mill coffee, you find, you're separating the coffee by size, but also by defect, broken pieces, undersized beans, half-formed, and those go into the C grade, etc. So there's parchment grades. Top parchment is P1, and there's P2 and P3. And so P1 should produce, higher quality. But P1, parchment grade 1 that comes from the farm, dried parchment coffee, can also produce these off grades. When you're a specialty buyer, you're only used to seeing the coffee after it's all been cleaned up and looks pretty. But people think of like commercial coffee and low-grade coffee, the stuff that, I don't drink that, that goes into Farmers Brothers and Folgers and pre-ground coffee. In fact, they have a grade here called grinders. and grinders are pieces and broken bits and black beans and that stuff. And it's interesting because it goes, I believe the name grinders is that it goes into coffee that's never seen as whole bean because it looks terrible. It doesn't look like whole bean. It's like pieces. And that's sold a lot for just street coffee. I understood a lot of coffee sold in India, like street vendor coffee would be grinders. Somebody told me there was a lot of Indian interest in grinders, but it could go a lot of places. Even P1 parchment, the top quality parchment, produces off grades. So commercial coffee can come from the finest AA 92 point Gatamboya from the best part of Nyeri at 2,000 meters. Will be producing commercial coffee to some degree. And that's kind of interesting. I think specialty, the way it's marketed, people have got the idea that it's somehow just some totally different thing separated completely from commercial coffee. But there's a continuum. And you see that continuum when you come here and you taste coffee. You're tasting all of the grades. What's also interesting about that is that the specialty buyers like to be like, oh, we paid this much for coffee. We paid so much. But for example, in some years, the beans are small and you produce a lot more AB. An AB can be very good. An AB can be definitely a notch below. But if a farm sells their AA to a specialty buyer who then says, we paid this amazing price for it, but they produced 5 bags of AA. And at the same time, they produced 45 bags of AB, and they produced, maybe 10 of PB, and then the C grade, maybe there's quite a lot because it's a rough year weather-wise. All the prices they get for those undergrades, the non-AA, grades underneath C grade, and grades from AB to PB and C, really are important to the farm in their financial health. If they sell their AA for an amazing price, they could still be not viable and financially in trouble because all the other grades don't sell. So the fact that commercial coffee sells as a good price is really as important as a small amount of specialty selling at an amazing price. But you'll never hear a commercial roaster saying, we paid, let's say the market is 180 as it is right now, and different grades will sell at a negative differential. So they'll sell it minus 10, minus 20, minus 40. Commercial roaster never says, we bought this for minus 40 and we're helping this farm survive, and put pictures of the farm on the bag and stuff. But they actually could. It actually would be important if they paid an extra 5 cents for this huge amount of coffee for the farm, like a tiny amount over what where the competition, put the price. They could actually be doing an amazing thing for the farm, and they could actually be the ones making the farm financially viable. So this is all just, speculation and stuff, but it's true. And you'll never see that. It's funny. Anyway, the day like yesterday of cupping here is pretty exhausting because I don't know, probably like 200 to 300 cups of coffee that you put your spoon in, and especially with Kenya and the intensity of flavor and acidity and stuff, Second to last table, I definitely lost it. I felt like my tongue was just, saying no. It's like a form of self-abuse to taste that much coffee. But then I kind of recovered. I did my recups, which was everything I picked all day from about the 6 different tables I cupped, plus the auction lots. And put those all up against each other and made some final selections and prioritized them. And I felt pretty happy with the work that day. But it was work. It was a lot. Also, I was in a cupping room. It's a new one that's really big, and beautiful, really well designed, but there's I think there was 8 other buyers there. It's a very popular exporter. It was nice. I met some cool people. I met this guy Sam from Intelligentsia that I've never met, and he's a really nice guy, really good cupper, and the staff there and stuff. But it's also very hard to focus when you're cupping like that. You don't have the advantage of just being in a room alone and thinking about what you're doing. That's what a day is like. I think a lot when I travel about how the coffee buyer thing taps into a lot of myths, the stuff like that you want to show in a YouTube video, and the pictures people seem to take over and over again that form these kind of tropes about coffee. If it's a farm, then it's the way they photograph a picker, the way they photograph somebody holding coffee cherry in their hands. And I think it's so important for companies that sell coffee and that visit coffee farms to kind of prove that they care and that they are interested and they're connected to the source. Since it's not a local source, it's not tomatoes grown, by a small farmer a little ways up the road. It's you have to get on a plane and go somewhere, generally, for a coffee buyer from the global northern hemisphere. I think a lot about the pictures I take and the photos I see other people take, because they all seem to be quite similar. I guess I use photography as a way of thinking about how people frame, I guess just the framework that we understand coffee through, because it's not the only framework, and it's not the framework, for example, that a farmer understands coffee. We come to a place that is far away for us, and it's just their backyard. It's just what they do every day and what they see every day, what they grew up with every day. That forms quite a different viewpoint. I never want to take away the fact that it's fun and exciting to come somewhere and for the first time or for hopefully for the 20th time. I mean, it's fun and exciting for me to be here. Some of the buyers I met were really cool because it was their first time, and they seemed a little, it's like you sort of have to be a coffee buyer and be respected. You kind of have to be a grizzled old, I've been here, blah, blah, blah. And, there's all this kind of like language around proving that you're valid. And it's so dumb, and I hated it. And I felt I had to do it a lot when I started traveling. It's like dropping names at a party or something. Like you're, no, I should be here. I know so-and-so. Oh, yeah, so-and-so. Oh, yeah, I was at their blah, blah, blah. And it's really dumb. So I don't want anyone to have to do that. Like if they think I'm now the really experienced person who's been here a lot and it's their first time, they are totally valid. And they have things that they know and can share that I don't know. And they'll have perspectives and perhaps interesting things to note that I may not think about. Nobody has to prove anything in that way, but contextualizing travel, like why are we here? What are we trying to do? What's our job? What's the foundational things that should have me get on a plane and do this to myself and burn, all the fossil fuel and get all jet lagged and stuff. There's costs, so why am I doing this? What's the purpose? And even the myths around like travel stories that are hard, like when I'm talking about, oh my God, I cupped 300 cups yesterday. There's a little swagger in that, but I did. I did, and it's not fun, and it's not so great. And I think of the pictures you would take that would communicate that, and they'd be different than the pictures that get taken. than the pictures I take. I don't know how, but I'm sure if I had someone taking pictures of me at some points when I'm just like about to lose it and it doesn't look fun, I'd like to kind of see those. I mean, when you drool coffee down your chin, or at the last table, I started like knocking cups, like hitting them because I'm just really losing it. It's too much. Wonder what those other things look like, but they kind of get edited out, even if they ever exist at all. As far as the way we talk about coffee and travel, we'll keep doing it. I'll keep repeating the same sort of cliches, I'm sure. Because, coffee is pretty, and these places are beautiful, and they are fun and exciting for me to come to, and I don't think I should hide that or be ashamed of it or anything, and I don't want anyone else to be. At the same time, once you get over the kind of basic questions, ask better questions. Dig in, and instead of looking forward at the picture you're going to take of the person with the hands full of coffee cherry, look to the side. What's going on in the other direction? And trying to think about the history and context, specifically, in Kenya, of coffee. Like, how did it come to be here? What's the history of it? Because that history is still alive, both in the people and the land. It's hard to not think of colonialism when you're here. And you remember that before 1950, Kenyans of color, Kenyans were not even allowed to plant coffee. It was feared that they wanted to limit who could plant coffee, how much coffee, so they could keep the price and they could keep control in the hands of white Kenyans and white colonists. And that history is written in this landscape that was heavily forested and is now a lot of it. And this area is full sun coffee, no shade. And a lot of the original trees are the ones just around these sort of colonial houses that were in the middle of coffee lands that are very beautiful and very romantic. But, some of that romance is based on white economic supremacy here. So those are things you can't exactly take pictures of. They feel very real and palpable as you kind of travel here and think about the history of coffee in general and the history of coffee in Kenya. So today I need to get ready and pack, and we'll go to another coffee lab. It's one that's owned exclusively by Kenyans, not by multinational, which is nice. And I will taste another, God knows how many coffees, but looking forward, what keeps you going is finding one that you get excited about. 1 in 40 or something like that is about the ratio. It's still worth it. Somehow, still worth it. Good morning, Tom. Hello. I'm good. Hello. I wanted to end this with a recording that I found in my friend's pile of 45 records near Nairobi. It's Fadhili William and the Black Shadows. This nice song, Hakuna Mwingine.
Hakuna mwingine zaidi yako, ni wewe wa maisha, moyo wangu na mapenzi yangu, nimekuachia, unavyonichekea ni wewe pekee, najivuna kwa maringo mengi, najiona kama niko ahera, pamoja na weye, shobe, basi fanya twende kwetu nyumbani, mama na baba wakakuone, haji kule kwetu kuna raha nyingi, hata wewe baby utapapenda, basi fanya twende kwetu nyumbani,